The rise of nationalism in Europe. Picture study. Figure 1. The dream of worldwide democratics and social republics. The pact between nations. A print prepared by Frederick Surieu, 1848. The number of possible questions on this picture. Name the French artist who visualized his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics in a series of four prints. The answer is Frederick Surieu. What does the first print of the series prepared by Frederick Surieu show? People of Europe and America, all ages and social classes, marching in long train and offering homage to the Statue of Liberty. How did the artist of the time of the French Revolution personify liberty? Liberty was personified as a female figure. What does the Statue of Liberty bear in hands? The Statue of Liberty bear in hands the torch of enlightenment in one hand and the Charter the Rights of Man in the other hand. Name two countries which were already nation states when Suryo realized his first print of the series. The United States and Switzerland. Why did Suryo show the people of Germany bearing the black, red, and gold flag while at the time when Suryo created his prints, the German people did not yet exist as United Nation? Flag they carry is an expression of liberal hopes in 1848 to unify nation state. Why does Frederick Suryo show Christ, saints, and angels gazing upon the scene from the heavens above? Christ, saints, and angels gazing upon the scene from the heavens above have been used to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world. Why did Frederick Suryo present utopian vision in his prints in 1848? People of the world are grouped as distinct nations, identified through their flags and national costume. He created the image to unify the disintegrated states into nation state under a democratic constitution. Have a look at the present map and how it evolved to be the present map. From the year 1700, have a look at the border of each regions, how it kept changing. During the Napoleonic Empire in 1810. So these are the two maps representing in 1810 and 1817. You can see the difference. In the year 1820, in the year 1830, in the year 1840s, in 1850s, in 1870s, in 1900. I hope you are getting the changes occurring in the borders of these regions. In the 1914 when World War I broke out, and this is the present map. What made this to happen? What all changes were brought? How these nation states were built is what entire chapter talks about. Before we begin, let's have a look at the timeline. The timeline is very important to know the chronological order of the events and to recollect all the points associated with that event. So right from beginning 1789, this was the year when French Revolution took place. 1797, Napoleon invaded Italy. Napoleonic War began. In the year 1801, Ireland was incorporated into the United Kingdom. In the year 1804, Napoleonic Code, that is Civil Code, was introduced. In the year 1814 to 15, fall of Napoleon after Battle of Waterloo and Treaty of Vienna took place. In the year 1821, Greek struggle for independence. In the years 1821 to 29, romantic imagination and national feelings emerged. 1832, the Treaty of Constantinople, Greek gained independence. 1834, Zollverein, a customs union, was established in Prussia. In 1845, Weavers in Silesia led the revolt. In 1859, unification of Italy took place. In the year 1861, Victor Emmanuel II became proclaimed King of Italy. In the year 1867, granted autonomy to Hungarians. In the year 1871, Prussian King William I was proclaimed German Emperor. In the year 1905, Slav nationalism gathers force in the Habsburg and Ottoman Empire. In the year 1914, nationalism led to disaster in Europe. The World War I broke out. Coming to the second concept in the textbook, the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. The first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. France, as you would remember, was a full fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of an absolute monarch. The political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of the French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from the monarchy to a body of French. The revolution proclaimed that it was the people who would henceforth constitute the nation and shape its destiny. From the very beginning, the French revolutionaries introduced various measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity among the French people. The idea of the sense of collective identity when it comes, you should remember these points. La patrie, the idea of la patrie, the fatherland, and les citoyens, the citizen, emphasize the nation of a united community enjoyed equal rights under a constitution. A few French flag, the tricolor, were chosen to replace the former royal standard. The Estates General was elected by the body of active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. New hymns were composed, oaths taken, and martyrs commemorated, all in the name of the nation. A centralized administrative system was put in place and it formulated uniform laws for all citizens within its territory. Internal customs dues were abolished, and a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted. Regional dialects were discouraged, and French, as it was spoken and written in Paris, became the common language of the nation. The revolutionaries further declared that it was the mission and the destiny of the French nation to liberate the people of Europe from despotic, in other words, to help other peoples of Europe to become nations. When the news of the events in the France reached the different part of the Europe, students and other members of educated middle classes began setting up Jacobin clubs. Their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and much of Italy in the 1790s. With the outbreak of the Revolutionary Wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. Within the wide swathe of territory that came under Napoleonic control, Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France. But in the administrative field, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as the Napoleonic Code, did away with all privileges based on birth, established equality before the law, and secured the right to property. This code was exported to regions under French control in the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy, and Germany. Napoleon simplified administrative divisions, abolished the feudal system, and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. In the towns, too, guild restrictions were removed, transport and communication systems were improved, peasants, artisans, workers, and new businessmen enjoyed a newfound freedom. Businessmen and small scale producers of goods, in particular, began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. However, in the areas conquered, the reactions of the local populations to French rule were mixed. Initially, in many places, what was the result of this entire reforms? In the areas conquered, the reactions of the local population of French rule were mixed. Initially, in many places such as Holland, Switzerland, as well as in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned to hostility as it became clear that the new administrative arrangements did not go hand in hand with political freedom. Increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the French armies required to conquer the rest of Europe all seemed to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. Initial enthusiasm soon turned into hostile. New administrative system did not go hand in hand with the political freedom. Increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription, recruitment of army. The next topic is the making of nationalism in Europe. If you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, so you will find that there were no nation states as we know them today. What we know today as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons whose rulers had their autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse peoples. They did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity or a common culture. Often they even spoke different languages and belonging to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and people. It included the Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria, and the Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, the aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominant groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire a mass of subject peasants people, Bohemians and Slovaks to the north, Slovenes in Corniola, Croats to the south, and Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. How did nationalism and the idea of the nation state emerge? Socially and politically, landed aristocracy was the dominant class. Let's have a look at the different class and the ideologies emerged, which will contribute to the making of the nationalism in Europe. The aristocracy and the middle class. Dominant class was the aristocracy class. The members of this class were united by the common way of life that cut across regional divisions. They owned estates in the countryside and also two houses. They spoke French for purposes of diplomacy, and in high society. Their families were often connected by ties of marriage. This powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a small group. The majority of the population was made up of the peasantry. To the west, the bulk of the land was farmed by tenants and small owners, while the Eastern and Central Europe, the pattern of landholding was characterized by vast estates which were cultivated by serfs. In Western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of individual production and trade meant the growth of towns and the emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. Industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in France and parts of German states, it occurred only during the 19th century. In its wake, new social groups came into being: a working class population and middle class made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals. In Central and Eastern Europe, these groups were smaller in number till late 19th century. It was among the educated liberal middle classes that ideas of national unity following the abolition of aristocratic privileges gained popularity. What did liberal nationalism stand for? The ideas of national unity in early 19th century Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. The term liberalism derived from the Latin root liber, meaning free. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom of the individual and equality of all before law. Politically, it emphasized the concern of government by consent. Since the French Revolution, liberalism had stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges, a constitution and representative government through parliament. 19th century liberals also stressed the inviolability of private property. Yet, equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffragette. You will recall that in revolutionary France, which marked the first political experiment in a liberal democracy, the right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to property owning men. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. Only for the brief period under the Jacobins did all adult males enjoy suffrage. However, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of minor, subject to the authority of fathers and husbands. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. In the economic sphere, liberalism stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. During the 19th century, this was a strong demand of the emerging middle classes. Let us take example of the German-speaking region in the first half of the 19th century. The Napoleon administration, there were 39 states. Each state has its own currency and weight and measures. A merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods would have had to pass through 11 customs barriers and pay a customs duty of about 5% at each one of them. Duties were often levied according to the weight or measurement of the goods. As each region had its own system of weights and measures, this involved time-consuming calculation. The measure of cloth, for example, was the LA, which in each region stood for a different length. An LA of textile material brought in Frankfurt would get you 54.7 centimeter of cloth, in Mainz 55.1 centimeter, in Nuremberg 65.6 centimeter, in Freiburg 53.5 centimeter. Such conditions were viewed as obstacle to economic exchange and growth by the new commercial classes who argued for the creation of a unified economic territory allowing the unhindered movements of goods and people and capital. In 1834, a customs union or Zollverein was formed at the initial of Prussia and joined by most of the German states. The union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. The creation of a network of railway further stimulated mobility, harnessing economic interest to national unification. A wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at the time. A new conservative after 1815. Following the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, European governments were derived by a spirit of conservatism. Conservatives believed, so let me tell you what is conservatism, a political philosophy that stressed the importance of tradition, established institutions and customs, and preferred gradual development to quick change. It is called conservatism. The conservative believed that established traditional institutions of state and society, like the monarchy and the church, social hierarchies, property, and the family, should be preserved. Most conservatives, however, did not propose a return to the society of pre revolutionary days. Rather, they realized from the changes initiated by Napoleon that modernized could in fact strengthen traditional institutions like the monarchy. It could make states' power more effective and strong. A modern army, an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economy, the abolition of feudalism and serfdom would strengthen the autocratic monarchies of Europe. In 1815, representatives of European power, Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Austria, who had collectively defeated Napoleon, met at Vienna to draw up a settlement for Europe. The Congress was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich. The delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna of 1815 with the objective of undoing most of the changes that came about in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. The Bourbon dynasty, which had been deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power and French lost the territories it had annexed under Napoleon. A series of states were set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in future. Thus, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in the north and Geneva. Thus, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in the north and Geneva was added to Piedmont in the south. Prussia was given important new territories on its western frontier, while Austria was given control of the northern Italy, but the German Confederation of 39 states that had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched in the east. Russia was given part of Poland, while Prussia was given a portion of Saxony. The main intention was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by Napoleon and create a new conservative order in Europe. Conservative regimes set up in 1815 were autocratic. They did not tolerate criticism and dissent and sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocratic governments. Most of them imposed censorship laws to control what was said in newspapers, books, plays, and songs, and reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom. As you can see the image over here, the Club of Thinkers, anonymous caricature dating to 1820s. The plaque on the left bears the inscription, the most important question of today's meeting. How long will thinking be allowed to us? The board on the right side, the rules of the club, which include the following. Silence is the first commandment of this learned society. To avoid the eventuality whereby a member of this club may succumb to the temptation of speech, muzzles will be distributed to members upon entering. The most of the imposed censorship laws to control what was said in newspapers, books, plays, and songs and reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom associated with the French Revolution. The memory of the French Revolution nonetheless continued to inspire liberals. One of the major issues taken up by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative order was freedom of the press. Coming to the next topic, the revolutionaries. During the years following 1815, the fear of repression drove many liberal nationalists underground. Secret societies sprang up in many European states to train revolutionaries and spread their ideas. To be revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to oppose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress and to fight for liberty and freedom. Most of these revolutionaries also saw the creation of nation states as a necessary part of this struggle for freedom. One such individual was the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini. Giuseppe Mazzini did not tolerate criticism and dissent. He wanted to curb the activities that questioned legitimacy of activities of government. To talk about Giuseppe Mazzini, he was an Italian revolutionary born in Geneva in 1805. Members of secret society called Carbonaries. As a young man of 24, he was sent into exile in 1831 for attempting a revolution in Liguria. He subsequently founded two more underground societies, first Young Italy in Marseilles and then Young Europe in Burney, whose members were like-minded young men from Poland, France, Italy, and Germany. Mazzini believed that God had intended nations to be the natural units of mankind. So, Italy could not continue to be a patchwork of small states and kingdoms. It had to be forged into a single unified republic within a wider alliance of nations. This unification alone could be the basis of Italian liberty. Following his model, secret societies were set up in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland. Mazzini's relentless opposition to monarchy and his vision of democratic republics frightened the conservatives. Duke Metternich describes Mazzini as most dangerous enemy of our social order. So you can see the image over there in the right hand corner, Giuseppe Mazzini and the founding of Young Europe in Burney in 1833, printed by Giacomo Mantegazza. The next topic is the Age of Revolutions 1832-1848. As conservative regime tried to consolidate their power, liberalism and nationalism came to be increasingly associated with revolution in many regions of Europe, such as the Italian and German states, the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, Ireland, and Poland. These revolutions were led by the liberal nationalists belonging to the educated middle class elite, among whom were professors, school teachers, clerks, and members of the commercial middle classes. The first upheaval took place in France in July 1830, which is called July Revolution. The Bourbon king, who had been restored to power during the conservative reaction after 1815, were now overthrown by liberal revolutionaries who installed a constitutional monarchy with Louis Philippe at its head. Metternich once remarked, "When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold." The July Revolution, 1830, sparked an uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. An event that mobilized the nationalist feelings among the educated elite across Europe was the Greek War of Independence. Greece had been a part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century. The growth of the revolution, nationalism in Europe, sparked off a struggle for independence amongst the Greeks, which began in 1821. Nationalists in Greece got support from other Greeks living in exile and also from many Western Europeans who had sympathies for ancient Greek culture. Poets and artists landed Greece as the cradle of European civilization and mobilized public opinions to support its struggle against a Muslim empire. The English poet Lord Byron organized funds and later went to fight in the war where he died of fear in 1824. Finally, the Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. The next topic is the romantic imagination and national feelings. So, what is romanticism? A cultural movement which sought to develop a particular form of nationalist sentiment. Their effort was to create a sense of shared collective heritage of common culture past. Imagination is the primary faculty for creating all art. Some important romantic artists to note over here. Delacroix. The French painter Delacroix was one of the most important French romantic painters. His huge painting, which is given in figure 8 in the textbook, depicts an incident in which 20,000 Greeks were said to have been killed by Turks on the island of Chios. By dramatizing the incident, focusing on the suffering of women and children, and using vivid colors, Delacroix sought to appeal to the emotions of the spectators and create a sympathy for the Greek. Next comes the other romantics such as the German philosopher John Gottfried Herder, 1744 to 1803. He claimed that true German culture was to be discovered among the common people. Das Ook. It was through folk songs, folk poetry, and folk dances that the true spirit of the nation, Oakside, was popularized. So, collecting and recording these forms of folk culture was essential to the project of nation building. Next, one more example we have here, Karol Kuprinski. Karol Kuprinski, for example, celebrated the national struggle through his operas and music, turning folk dance like the Polonaise and mazurka into nationalist symbols. Use of Polish came to be seen as a symbol of the struggle against Russian dominance. Language too played an important role in developing nationalist sentiments. After Russian occupation, the Polish language was forced out of schools and the Russian languages was imposed everywhere. In 1831, an armed rebellion against Russia rule took place, which was ultimately crushed. Following this, many members of the clergy in Poland began to use language as a weapon of national resistance. Polish was used for church gatherings and all religious instruction. As a result, a large number of priests and bishops were put in jail or sent to Siberia by the Russian authorities as punishment for their refusal to preach in Russian. The use of Polish came to be seen as symbol of the struggle against Russian dominance. So, in the romantic imagination and the national feeling, we'll come across Grimm brothers, folk tales and national building. Grimm's fairy tales is a familiar name. The brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were born in the German city of Hanau in 1785 and 1786 respectively. While both of them studied law and they soon developed an interest in collecting old folk tales. They spent 6 years traveling from village to village, talking to people and writing down fairy tales which were handed down through the generations. These were popular both among children and adults. In 1812, they published their first collection of tales. Subsequently, both the brothers became active in liberal political, especially the movement for freedom of the press. Meantime, they also published a 33-volume dictionary of the German language. The Grimm brothers also saw French domination as threat to German culture and believed that the folk tales they had collected were expression of a pure and authentic German spirit. They considered their project of collecting folktales and developing the German language as part of the wider effort to oppose French domination and create a German national identity. The next topic is hunger, hardship, and popular revolt. The 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century saw the enormous increase in population all over Europe. In most countries, there were more seekers of job than employment. Population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. Small producers in towns were often faced with the stiff competition from imports of cheap machine-made goods from England, where industrialization was more advanced than other continents. This was especially so in textile production, which was carried out mainly in homes or small workshops and was only partly mechanized in those regions of Europe where the aristocracy still enjoyed power. Peasants struggled under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. The rise of food prices or a year of the bad harvest led to widespread pauperism in towns and countries. In the year 1848 was such one year where food shortages and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the road. Barricades were erected and Louis Philippe was forced to flee. National Assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21 and guaranteed the right to work. National workshops to provide employment were set up. So in the year 1845, weavers in Silesia had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw materials and gave them order for finished textiles but drastically reduced their payments. The journalist Wilhelm Wolff described the events in a Silesian village as follows. In this village, with 18,000 inhabitants, cotton weaving is the most widespread occupation. The misery of the workers is extreme. The desperate need for jobs have been taken advantage of by the contractors to reduce the prices of the goods they order. On 4 June at 2 p.m., a large crowded on 4 June 2 p.m., a large crowded of weavers emerged from their homes and marched in pace up to the mansion of their contractors demanding high wages. They were treated with scorn alternately. Following this, a group of them forced their way into the house, smashed its elegant windows, panes, furniture, porcelain. Another group broke into the storehouses and plundered in it of supplies of cloth which they tore to shreds. The contractors fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. He returned 24 hours later, having requisitioned the army. In the exchange that followed, 11 weavers were shot.